Welcome to the Half Glass Podcast, where theology plus technology equals uncertainty, and we can never be quite sure if that glass is half empty or half full.
So we're back, and we've been talking about all kinds of things, and we didn't start really the podcast with a plan, did we? Except to say we were going to gab because we like doing that.
Yeah, we're going to wrap.
And it's been fun, and I think some good things have come out for anyone watching.
For the two people watching, hi.
That they'll know they know a little bit about our personalities, and of course more will come out. But we were talking just before we switched the camera on about why anyone would want to watch us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not because I'm an expert in philosophy. I'm not a philosophy professor. I'm not a theology professor. I'm not a historian. I'm not a professional social commentator. I'm not any of those things.
Me neither. What are you then, man?
I'm a pastor. And I do feel like if there's something that someone ought to listen to me about, it's like how you take all this mess that's going on in our world and try to reduce it to something that means something to people.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have no professional acumen to bring to the table other than the fact that I'm trying to be a decent pastor.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do my job.
So, speaking of which, what'd you do the first Sunday in Lent?
That's right, man. Yeah, so we just started Lent. First week of Lent, right? Yeah, we're in the first Friday of Lent here today. Yeah, man, we were talking about before. So we did Jesus in the desert, in the wilderness, tempted by Satan. And I did something a little bit different. I don't usually do. I kind of borrowed from another book to kind of, connect to the text. For Lent, I'm trying to read this book by Henry Nouwen called In the Name of Jesus. And in this book, he basically, it's like his case for Christian discipleship, Christian leadership. And in the book, he uses two Bible texts as like the source, that he's deriving his thinking from. And one of them is the temptation of Jesus in the desert from Luke and Matthew. And then later he's going to bring in the reinstatement of St. Peter after the resurrection, which is a cool text too. But anyway, so I just kind of borrowed, I stole from Nouwen and used some of his quotes and to help us think about Jesus' temptation in the desert, as I was telling you. And then you can kind of talk about what you did as well, because I think they're connected. Nouwen, so the first temptation of Jesus in the desert is Satan goes to him and says, you see these rocks, these stones, you're hungry, make a bread out of them, right? Whatever. And then, of course, Jesus says, no, man does not live by bread alone. And Luke doesn't say, but by every word of the Lord, but, the other ones do. But anyway, and it's like this text that we've seen a million times, and it's about hunger and satiation. And, we, of course, in Lent, we fast, and this is a huge text we derive that from. But anyway, Nouwen took a different approach that I never really thought about. And I'll throw it to you, and again, we talked about earlier, is he says, actually, what this temptation fundamentally at core is like all of us, Jesus too, the temptation to be productive. The temptation to find a utility out of anything and everything. So don't let in other words, don't let the stone just be a stone. Let the stone have a use. Because a stone is just a useless, stupid thing. It's a rock. It's what's that good for? Nothing. Throw it away. But if you can make bread from it, now we're talking. Now we're cooking. Pun intended. And so Nouwen basically argues, in this grandiose way, he says, this is the temptation that all of us have for like efficiency and productivity and trying to do, don't just sit there, do something. And then I kind of riffed on that a little bit and preached on that. And
what did you say you riffed on it? I mean, what message to your community? Because you have a fascinating community. I don't think we've talked about that, but just driving down here, we're sitting in the St. Paul Library here doing this podcast, and every time I drive down, I love Southtown in San Antonio. It's this. I say it's a quaint old neighborhood, but it's probably 50% regentrified at this point. And just driving down Florida Street or Carolina Street, coming down to your place. I mean, it's like you can just see which houses have been redone, and the ones that haven't been, I'm sure, just already go for millions of dollars.
Yeah, maybe not that much, but almost. Yeah, so we're a part of the city in San Antonio that is, I would argue, or a lot of people would argue, is probably one of the most rapidly gentrifying, maybe top 2 or 3 in the entire city. It's just south of downtown. And so, historically, this was a German suburb. It was 150 years ago, whatever, and that's why we're here as a Lutheran church. And then you had the white flight in the 60s, 50s, and then the Hispanics have always been here, but they kind of, that was their neighborhood. And now it's the strange thing of where a lot of urban, young, professional, affluent people are moving back into the neighborhood. And so, our parish is,
and some of them
professors,
are coming to St. Paul now,
so
right?
a few of them. We're trying to get more and more, obviously. But yeah, so when I preach to my crowd of 100, whatever, 20 people a week, I'm thinking of them, but also I'm thinking like in this way, like I'm preaching beyond the walls to just preach it to the neighbors.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, the truth is, for people now that can afford to buy a house in this neighborhood, a fixed up house, or
they're thinking about efficiency all the time, aren't they?
all the time. This is a word du jour, right? This is in the zeitgeist right now here in the United States, obviously for the political stuff going on. But yeah, so in my mind, by riff, I mean this. I mean, look, what does it mean to be a Christian in 2025? What does it mean to be a 35-year-old, 45-year-old person? We got dudes PhDs and from A&M and professors and attorneys and all these people like this. What does it mean to like succeed in your career but not reduce your life to your career? What does it mean to be really good at the research you're doing but not do that at the expense of not seeing your kids? I mean, these are the things that I'm preaching about, and that's what I mean by riffing on. And I think when Nouwen says that, and I think it is accurate, by the way, I agree with him. When Jesus decides to not turn the stones to bread, he tells all of us, don't reduce your life to irreducible efficiency. Everything doesn't have to always be the best and the greatest and the most successful. Now, again, the opposite, the inverse of that is laziness and procrastination and just utter kind of, disregard for any, making anything of your life or whatever. I'm not saying that either. But again, that's not the problem in this neighborhood. That's not the problem with the people who can afford an $850,000 house down the street and $10 cups of coffee. They are thinking money, efficiency, better, best. And what I want to say is, I think to be a Christian is to say, slow down, man. Efficiency is not the end goal, right? Mother Teresa, and I preached on this on Sunday. Remember, the famous Mother Teresa story is, she's did the Sisters of Mercy in Calcutta, gives up her life of whatever, normal comfort, lives with the poor. And everybody goes to her and says, you're doing this amazing work. Why don't we move you to London or New York or Sydney, and you can run an NGO in an office, and you can actually quadruple 10 times the amount of good work you can do for the world. And she says, Jesus doesn't call me to be successful. He calls me to be faithful. And I think there's something to that. So that's what I mean by riff. I was exploring that, preaching on that to my people. Sure.
And there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I should listen to your sermon. I guess it's recorded. Right?
This week it was actually, we glitched out our primitive technology here. Not as good as we don't have Audio Technica mics, man. Sorry. Our technology glitched out. So it was the best sermon I ever preached, though. So sorry, you don't get to hear it.
Are you joking?
Yeah, I'm totally joking, of course. Yeah, it was whatever. It wasn't that great.
I'm sure it was fine. But I do think I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of preaching, because I do think that the difference between, say, preaching and theology is that in theology you really ought to be thinking of sort of more Aristotelian in terms of like finding the mean, right? The ethical mean that says, let's be balanced about this.
Yeah.
Let's think, how you could go too far one way or the other, the proper distinction between things, right? Mm-hmm. And but in kerygma, in preaching, mm-hmm. It's more about, like, you think of it sort of like a guy on the deck of a giant ship, like a merchant thing, and I mean they say full starboard, and they turn that rudder, and it takes like a nautical mile before the thing moves a little bit, and so they scream, hard starboard, hard starboard, hard starboard, and really in the end you have sermons that are like that, and I think that to sit to some regentrifying people who you really respect and you'd like to have more of, and saying, hey, slow down, which it runs antithetical to maybe what they would naturally think.
Of course.
But you're the guy that's shouting hard starboard, hard starboard. It's like, don't worry about, like, you could go to that extreme. So maybe you have a throwaway line. Well, you don't want to sit around and be a lazy bum, but then you spend almost 99% of your words telling them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, not just because I see this in the non-denominational world where they talk about, Sabbathing.
Rest.
It's like,
it's
and they use it as a verb, and they basically say, well, that's to make me more efficient Monday through Saturday. And if all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, right? So
That's great.
So
why
I
do you
got to
rest?
take
Why
some
do you
time
rest? Let's rest so that you can not rest better. That's
Right.
absurd. No, yeah.
I mean, I don't know that I'd say it's absurd, but I mean, it is morally wrong. I mean, it's not that different than the Old Testament prophets that complained that what kind of Sabbath is this? You're just thinking about what you're going to do on Monday, or what you're going to do on, when the Sabbath is over.
That's a great connection point. I think it's hard to be a young person in this country and to value rest, because rest is almost seen as like a bad thing. It's like you're lazy, man. Don't sleep in. You're lazy. And now, of course, we have to nuance what it means to rest and what Sabbath is. But if you're just reducing Sabbath to another way for optimization in your life, you're missing the point.
Yeah,
that's not the point. It's not for optimization.
It's
for rest.
It was well, even more than that. It was a sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have people that are just barely making enough to eat, and I mean, it's like, well, we might go hungry because we sat here all day. And that was a reality, and the Lord didn't say, well, if things are going bad.
Yeah.
I mean, the one guy that we have, I'm only aware of one in Scripture where a man was killed for not following the Sabbath. Right, that was in Numbers.
Yeah.
You remember what he was doing?
Remember? No.
Collecting firewood.
Wow.
So he was like doing something practical, but it's like, hey, you're doing it on the Sabbath, and they caught him and they said, what should we do? Put him to death, and
he's collecting firewood to survive the winter.
Right, exactly, to keep his family alive,
Yes.
right? But it's like, no, you can't do it.
Well, that's the whole thing, though. I think the whole of the Christian message is one of, and it's irrational. It's, hey, man, Jesus, I want to go follow you, but my dad's funeral's tomorrow. And so, of course, in a shame and honor culture, where my father's everything to me and my kin folk, I've got to go pay my respects, right, Jesus?
Right.
He says, no, don't worry about that. We've got bigger, more important things to do than to maintain family moral structure and mores, which is just absurd. It's crazy. This is crazy.
Right. But I mean, we should never lose sight of the fact that there is, a mean, right? There's
Balance,
a golden
balance.
mean, right? An Aristotelian mean that we're shooting for.
Yeah.
But when you see the ship like going into the rocks, you're not saying, well, there's an ideal course. You say hard starboard, hard starboard, hard starboard.
Yes.
And so
that's exactly right. That's the task of the preacher, I think, these days. Many to kind of, we look at the world, things have gone a little bit crazy in lots of different ways, and so we've got to be like, we've got to be like Nietzsche and thus spoke Zarathustra, except for we're coming down the mountain not saying God's dead. We're actually saying, no, God's alive. God never died. Contrary to popular belief, God is alive. He's not dead. So we're the anti-Zarathustra.
Yeah. No. That. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's right. And so, I mean, that's a really interesting take when you think of it in terms of efficiency. Mm-hmm. It's in the neighborhood, I think, of what I preached on.
Yeah. What did you do for that? Because let's talk about your whole little renaming thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
What I did, I also spent the time talking about the first temptation, but for a slightly different reason. It's just because, and I've got these rocks that I handed out. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But it was just, in my case, I was just thinking about the text, and it occurred to me, in the past, I always thought that this was the most trivial of the three to preach on, the three temptations. And
what are they, the rocks?
The rocks, throwing yourself off the temple, and which, I mean, that's kind of that's a trickier one to interpret.
With the angels and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think in the end, that's one about interpreting God's word.
Yeah.
Because it's the only time the devil quotes scripture, which he can do, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So and it's interesting that Luke puts that one at the end, because for him the interpretation and the temple are the most critical thing.
Yeah.
And and I've in years past I've spent most of my time on either the kingdoms of the world are mine and I can give them to you, or that you here's how I interpret God's word. What do you say to that? And they're both serious temptations. They're kind of more churchy ones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
so the rock one,
and so the rock one, I was said, oh yeah, of course, but because it's like, well, and I started out by telling the folks, I mean, I never felt that I could relate to this one because I don't have the power to turn stones into bread. And so it's like, if I'm hungry, if there's nothing to eat, I just got to deal with it. And Jesus could. So, all right, that was a 10. And I guess what that means is that there's times when maybe I shouldn't eat too much, or I mean, I don't know. I mean, never really spent much time thinking about it, but it suddenly struck me that you have to sort of analyze it a little bit more and say, what did that rock represent to Jesus? Mm-hmm. And similar to what Nouwen says, rocks are everywhere, mm-hmm. and they're just rocks. And Jesus had the power. He had a need. He was at the end of a 40-day fast. And he had the need to the need to eat. At the end of a 40-day fast, your body, the next time you get hungry, it's like this is your last chance.
Yeah.
And so I mean, it was a legitimate need if he was going to stay alive, needed to eat. And Satan says, well, okay, you have this need, you have the power. Why don't you just do it, man? So I said, well, okay, let's map that as well as we can to our lives. What does a rock mean to us? It's something that's everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's something that is just sitting there. It has maybe no particular need, but we have the power to transform it to something that's going to suit our needs, that's mm-hmm. going to meet our needs. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I reached out and pulled a rock out of my pocket to illustrate that. But then I said, what other common things are we surrounded by? And I pulled my phone out and held it up.
Here we go.
And I said, okay, phones are everywhere. Everyone's got one. And I told the story. It bothered me a little bit when Mark Bars, not in a bad way, but Mark gave a presentation to a recent trip he made to Kenya, mm-hmm. and he was talking about how in the church services that he had, they don't have a lot of money, mm-hmm. and so they just use a phone, and they hold the phone up and they dance to the phone music or sing to the phone music, mm-hmm. and it's like, well, when you think of Africa, you're kind of thinking something a little more romantic, right? Than a bunch of people sort of singing along to a cell phone. But that's what.
Where's the tribal drum group?
Yeah, right, exactly. But even in Africa now,
sure,
there's the phone, and I mean it's pretty wild to think about.
Western civilization,
and so they're everywhere, and it's like, okay, they have their uses.
It bothered you because it robbed you of this romantic view that you had in your mind. Yeah,
exactly. But the phone is ubiquitous, and
that's interesting.
But we transform this tool, mm-hmm. King's North's flip phone. We transform it into a way to waste a lot of time because I'm stressed out. And I said, I'm not saying you're not stressed out. I'm not saying that you might need a break.
Sure.
But to sit there and zone out and then ignore other people in your life that you could maybe be building a relationship with instead, and sit there and zoom and scroll through the stuff and just get your predilections and your prejudices confirmed.
Mm-hmm. Both of which are done. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And to sit there for yet another 2 hours and do that. I mean that's an inappropriate use. It's the equivalent of turning a stone into bread, because Jesus says, I'm not here to do that. I'm here to fast. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to just satisfy my needs. And so how does that relate in your mind? How does that relate to Nouwen? Am I right to say Nouwen? Sorry, is that?
I mean, it totally does. It's exact. I mean, I love the cell phone analog, or the smartphone, because it's this whole idea of like this tool that within the past 3 decades has transformed into like. I mean, it really was simple, right? I remember being in high school getting my first cell phone. It was like you could maybe send a text or two, but it was hard because all the numbers,
right.
It was a pain. And then you could play like some little snake game, a little antiquated Atari kind of game on it. But it was designed for phone calls. Like that's kind of like it's to make a phone call. And by the way, like not all the time, but like you just need it. Like I remember saying to somebody recently, like, there used to be a time when like you could drive and not know where you were going. If you didn't have a Thomas Guide map in your car, like you would just drive. And I grew up in Southern California. We would just drive. Where are we getting off? I don't know. We're just going to drive.
Well, when I was a kid, I mean, and even as a young adult, I mean, I remember, before cell phones, when I travel alone, I mean, the billboards would tell you where the Holiday Inn was, right? It's just, it's about time to stop for the night.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's one in like 3 miles.
Where am I going to eat?
Let's stop there. Yeah, let's stop there and see if what the rates are, and
Exactly.
and
Yes.
if I need to keep driving or
Of course.
and
But then my point is though is this tool that started, it was a rock, man. It was a stone. It was you call people. Simple. That's it. And now within maybe less than 2 decades, right? Whatever, no timestamp on it, but now it's like this all-encompassing. The joke is, and it's probably real, there's more technology in your pocket right now than there was that got people to the Apollo mission to the moon. And so like there's something, I think that's a great connector. It just to tell people, man, like we are a part of this religion that tells us to slow down. Why? Not just to slow down for the sake of slowing down to like lionize like some kind of weird monkish lifestyle, a la King's North or whatever, or the whole Roman, other religions, other denominations. But no, why? Slow down so you can connect with your family. Slow down so, especially in the season of Lent, so you can maybe say some more prayers. So you can maybe give to the poor person down the street, to maybe go volunteer time, to maybe, fast from some things that you've been just I just feel like Lent is a great time for us to do that. So I think, your sermon is very in line with what Nowen is saying. Almost, that's exactly the same thing. I should give you the book. I got an extra one, maybe, in the name of Jesus. But anyway, I think people need to hear that. I love the cell phone thing. I've preached about the cell phone thing, but just not this past Sunday. But yeah.
Sure. Well, it's something that bears repeating.
Totally. Absolutely. Because we just don't even think about it. Technology we'll embrace, and now we're giving it to 10-year-olds. It's tread lightly, man. Be very careful.
Yeah, I think some warning is in, and I handed these out to everybody. This is actually, if you look at it closely, it's not only clean. I bought these at Home Depot, but my granddaughter helped me wash them off, and then we actually put a very light coat of paste wax on each one to just give it a tiny little bit of shine, so it would go easy in the pocket. And after the children's sermon, I know you're not a big fan of those, but I had the children hand out the rocks to everyone.
Shh, don't tell anybody.
I had the children hand out the rocks to everybody, and I told them, I said, what I want you to do is keep this in your pocket or your purse, somewhere where you're going to see it all week, and I want you to think about the ordinary things in your life, because the cell phone was just one of several examples I gave. We talked about even just words and how words, we use them to communicate, and they're sitting around all the time, but you can turn words into a weapon.
Absolutely.
If you're and maybe you have a legitimate need, maybe you're irritated with someone, maybe you're really frustrated and you just had enough, but you can get to the point where you relish your words, and you see the look on their face, and you see that it hit home, and and it's like, did you really need to do that? Did you really need to turn the word into that?
You can hurt people and control people's words, man. Yeah.
And it's within our power, very much within our power to do that. And it's just like Jesus turning, but is it appropriate? Is it appropriate? Sometimes, yes. Jesus fed 5,000 people. You didn't even need a rock, right? There's times when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's not. And that gets down to your efficiency thing.
Yeah.
And to me, maybe at the center of all this sort of charismatic approach to efficiency, preaching approach. It's like, in the end, it's like, is the only thing we should really be optimizing for is our relationship with God. There's like, you can't get too close to God. Now you could, there's a lot of ways you could take those words and twist them and use them to do something unhealthy. But that wouldn't be because you were over optimizing your relationship with God. It'd be because you found some idol that represents God to you. But just constantly. But everything else, it needs to have its place and say, no, wait a minute. I do think that was the original purpose of the Sabbath, is to say,
back to rest.
Sabbath to the Lord.
Yeah.
Right? It's like this, you're doing this because that's the reason he gives in the 10 Commandments. He said, I rested on the seventh day. You need to rest on the seventh day. This is going to be a bond between you and me.
Connect us. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you talk about optimization, right? I feel like I find myself preaching against it and talking against it all the time. Look, like, again, you always have to like play the extreme thing here. Like, Are we saying that it's not good to be healthy? Of course not. Are we not saying it's not good to optimize some parts of your life and your business and whatever? Yes. But it's funny, we're talking about podcasts, we're on a podcast here. And there's the great irony is that I feel like nowadays, for these younger folks, like they have a podcast for every bit of their life in terms of optimization. The podcast you listen to get financially fit, so you get, invest well. The podcast to listen to, some philosophy podcast to think things thoroughly and build your brain. The podcast for, whatever, insert it. And so I just don't see how, I don't see the Christian message being one of optimization. I think as preachers, as pastors, as, people in this tradition, our job is not to preach optimization or even encourage it, really. I think our job is to show them a whole new way of death and resurrection, which doesn't play into the optimization thing. Because it says you can't even if you tried. You need God to do it for you. Full stop. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, I like it.
So back to Lent. Okay, so you got your rocks here.
So yeah, and part of this was it's something I don't think I've mentioned on this podcast. I think I've talked to you a little bit. I made the decision in my own congregation over the past year that I'm going to make this this sort of arbitrary division of our church year, and say the festival half. I want to get more liturgical. I want to seek out and maybe reimagine some of the old traditions, some of which people have never done in our congregation, and some of which they might remember from when they were younger if they're older members, and just say I'm going to get more traditional, more liturgical action in the festival half, where it's a rehearsal. Every year a recital of starting in Advent and moving through Pentecost. The God's plan for the salvation of the world and the coming of the kingdom. And then the non-festival half, I want to basically ditch the green, actually ditch the readings too, and just say, I'm planning out some longer preaching series, which I've never had to do before. It's challenging for me at my age because I've kind of gotten worn into the pattern of what's on the lectionary. And
You've always preached lectionary? Always preached lectionary?
Always.
1 year, 3 years?
And 3 year, and always the Gospels. And, very rare for me to even do an epistle. And so I'm very good at preaching gospel pericopes. But, some of the other things it feels a little stiff. And what I'm, for instance, my first big series I think I'm going to do out of the chute in June this year is I'm going to talk about Ezekiel. We're going to march through the book of Ezekiel. I'm not going to preach. It's too long of a book to do the whole thing. But I'm going to pull out highlights and say, hey, read the intervening parts in this week to kind of stay. And we're going to work through the whole book of Ezekiel, which I think it's a fascinating book.
Super.
And I say Ezekiel's in a lot of ways is a man for our time. He was the one that had to keep telling the Jews while they were in captivity, because he was in captivity with them. He had to keep telling them the early part of his career because they kept saying, oh, God's going to rescue us. We're going to go back. We're going to go back. And in the first half of his career, Ezekiel had to say, no, you're not. No, you're not. You just don't know how serious this is. Really how angry God is with you. You don't get it yet. And then his wife dies, and Ezekiel's wife symbolizes the old covenant. And his wife dies, and then at the same week, news comes in that Nebuchadnezzar, attacked Jerusalem a second time, and this time he tore it to the ground, and there's just nothing left. And at that point, they wanted to give up and say, well, let's just become Babylonians then. And that's when Ezekiel had to do a 180 and say, no. You're going to go back. You're going to go back. You're going to go back. There's, the Valley of the Bones and all that sort of stuff.
Dry bones, yeah.
And so, I think in a lot of ways, it captures sort of the sort of neurotic nature of our own time.
Oh, this is good, man. This is a pivot here. So, why is Ezekiel a prophet for our time? So speak to neuroticism and speak to why. So what do you mean? So if you can't beat him, join him is what we have. So make the connection points to our culture now.
Well, I think the point in our culture is that we are the Enlightenment project has worked itself out, and what we see is a bunch of broken stuff on the ground, and no one has any plan on how to move forward. That, I mean, it's very much like the Jews in Babylon hearing the news. Oh, Jerusalem's on the floor. It's just he tore the temple down. There's nothing left.
So just forget about it. We tried this religion, it didn't work out. Let's move on.
That's what some of them want to say. And Ezekiel says, no. You're going to go back, kind of, because I mean, his final vision is a vision of the temple.
Yeah, restore.
You know, I mean, it's like
the glory of the Lord coming back in the temple.
Right. But I mean, but the temptation that we face, and we've talked about it here. We've used the word a few times in our past podcasts, is repristination. And I think I think it's the temptation of the devil for us to say, let's just wind back the clock a little bit. You can see these Enlightenment guys took it too far. Let's just go back and let's be old fashioned again. And it's not going to work.
Yeah, man, this is so tricky. Like, so we have talked about this in the past, but I really struggle with it because in our church, we're getting some younger people, you know, like 20, 30-year-olds. And, you know, every week we look at, we have some new younger people that are visiting, and maybe they'll stick around. But what I'm finding in some of them, and again, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it bears repeating, this desire, and you see it happening in the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, right? These young men that are leaving other denominations and traditions, or atheism or agnosticism, and they kind of are like hearkening back to like this ancient way of doing things. And so, you know, in a way, like, you know, there's some data on the Missouri Synod that shows like some of the smaller growing churches are liturgical ones.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in a way our church is maybe a little minor growth because of some of that. But what I'm seeing is like, with it comes this kind of repristination approach that, remember the whole Walther thing? Like, you know, I think our synod had ran something about, you know, not your grandpa's church or grandma's church, and a picture of Walther. And no, so now they're saying, well, no, this is what we want. We want your grandfather's church.
Yeah.
We want this old, you know, kind of way of doing things. And I wrestle with it because I'm not the kind of Protestant that like is just throw everything out and move on, right? I'm actually like trying to be like, you know, this Lutheran that believes that, you know, that we had to make changes and we had to leave, but they kicked us out, and that in other words that I think more of ancient forms and ceremonies is not a bad thing. But I'm seeing in some of these young guys is that they want to repristinate the past, exactly like you say. They in their mind think that if we could return to whatever golden era, make, you know, the church great again, whatever that looked like, then things will be great.
Yeah.
And you always push against me because there's a part of me that says that too, man. There's a part of me that's, as an outsider, right? No Lutheran bona fides for me, man. You know, first dude to graduate high school in my family, let alone college, seminary. No Lutherans in my family. I'm lapsed Roman Catholic, Mexican, Irish. And so for me, it's like, yeah, man, if we could return to 19 whatever, 18 whatever, or 16 whatever, and things will be great. Then we'll fix all of our problems, and it will live in the golden years of Lutheranism, whatever that looked like. So I just personally, like, there's a part of me that thinks that as well. But you remind me so much, and I see it myself now, is that we can't pretend that we can just turn back the clock. It's just, you just can't do it. That's not the reality we live in. There's no counterfactual to that other than the reality we live in now. And we have to move forward, balancing the past, but also looking ahead. So but that's a struggle, man. It's a real struggle, because I want to honor the past, but I don't want to just, you know, get a time machine or whatever.
Sure. Well, I don't have any problems with honoring the past, and I mean, again, I mean, I'm thinking forward to what I see in Ezekiel and what I want to preach on. Mm-hmm. I mean, he definitely, in his vision of the temple, I mean, he's saying, look, it can be a way it never was, but the way it should have been to begin with. Mm. And I mean, and that's not really repristination. That's like recovery.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's good.
And I mean, I think, and so in the end, the trick becomes, and again, I do think it's almost a preaching task more than a theological one. Mm. It's like, how do you find that the thing that speaks to people and says, yeah, that's what we want to do. And I mean, and that's, you asked about Lent, and that's what, and again, that's what I'm trying to do. I remember growing up, I mean, we never talked about it in church that I could remember, but I remember always to see these weird Latin names like in the front of TLH, for the different weeks.
The old
and and the old hymnal, and we did pre-Lent back then too. So there was like, and you see the title, Sexagesima Sunday or Septuagesima Sunday, I mean, we go through that every year, and it's like, I always wondered, it almost looked like some kind of like magic incantation or something. I said, what is this thing? The pastor never talks about it.
Yes.
But it fascinated me as a young boy, as a boy and a young man. It's like, what is this stuff? That they were just, that they were just never doing it. And I want to recover some of that fascination for people.
Yeah.
But you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Those nicknames were tied. They were I think in every case in Lent. The nickname of the Sunday are the opening words in Latin of the introit psalm.
Oh, introit, yeah.
And
invocavit, right?
Right. Invocavit. What's it? Remissera.
Remissera, remember? Yeah.
Yeah, and oculi.
Yeah, this is like a deep cut. So people listening, like this is like basically the Latin names for the Sundays of Lent.
Yes.
That most guys in our denomination, in our tradition, don't use or know or care. Although there's some maybe dudes that are bringing it back, some 1-year guys maybe, or I don't really know, but
I just use it as a teaching tool. I think this is really kind of interesting, and to me, I don't know that I care that much about the particulars. When I found out it was just the first word of the that kind of took something off of it for me. I mean, if it were thematic, it would have been. If it were a thematic word, it would have meant more to me, quite honestly. And I tried to replace them. So I actually. And I'm conflicted. I'll share that with you. I mean, I'm conflicted about me doing this at Christ our Savior, but I am pushing new names for some of these. Like, I nicknamed this last Sunday Laqueris, which means snare in Latin. I wanted to call it Snare Sunday, but that sounds terrible. And so I thought the Latin sounds cooler. So just Laqueris, and the snare, the snares that Jesus tries, that the devil tries to catch us with, and
so you kept the Latin, you kept the cool Latin,
tried to keep.
And by the way, for the record, I think the reason they do the first Latin word is, I mean, the same way to this day at the Roman Church for like even encyclicals, Second Vatican Council documents, like Gaudium et Spes or whatever, like they just take the first line of the writing. They literally just take the first word. It's what they've always done.
It's the way they put titles on
exactly
things.
Right.
And that's all it was. Yeah.
So, but anyway, you kept the Latin, but you wanted to connect it to the theme more like robustly.
I wanted more of a thematic tie, because every year I hope that we'll talk about the snares on the first Sunday.
Which we do, right? It's the Jesus in the desert and the temptations.
Right. So, and so it's like,
that's cool.
Is it a bad thing that we spend 1 week every year thinking about the different snares and temptations we fall into, and just no matter what, we're going to do that?
Well, this is the whole thing we talked about before, right? Like, to what degree, because again, back to our LCMS little tribe, how many people use the lectionary? I don't really know. I know we live in the Texas district, and I got a lot of friends who don't do the lectionary at all. They just do series, and they just do whatever they do, and that's cool. God bless them. But my question is, to what degree do we submit to, whatever magisterium that has given us the lectionary, right? So if you're going to use it, do you where's the line where you say, okay, I'm going to take these readings and do it? Like we at our church, we just do 3 year. Just always done it, and I don't have the energy or the desire to get away from it. Never thought about the 1 year really either, right? But like, where's the line of submitting to the tradition and then saying, well, actually, to serve my people, because you're doing it out of service, to serve my people, I'm going to make some changes here. I'm going to do Ezekiel in the summer. I'm going to change the Latin names. How do you determine that?
Well, like I say, I'm conflicted. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, as the more I study the texts in detail, and it was a project for a long time I had, right from when I was right out of the seminary. I always wanted to come up with a daily devotion that was tied to the weekly readings.
That's cool.
And that fleshed them out and maybe did the whole scripture, the whole Bible, which would be about a chapter a day over 3 years, and was coordinated with the Sundays. But that's a very difficult project because it's like you have to thematically analyze every single week for 3 years and say, okay, what of the remaining texts that aren't in the lectionary, how do you fill those out in those weeks to do that in a good way?
It's a lot of work, man.
It is, and I mean, of course, Rome has a daily lectionary, and we do too. But it's a lot more like just a lectio continua, just read through the Bible.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, to be honest, any Protestant would do that, right? Just pick up the Bible and just march through it, right? Yeah. But is that really the best way to approach the Scriptures? I mean, I'm not entirely sure that it is. I mean, I think a thematic repeat of it every year would be really good, but I think, and it's partly that it's all these conflicts that have built up in me. It's like what would really work for people.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the question, right? So the reason a tradition originated 2 or 3 centuries ago was probably because it served the church's interest, the people's interest, whether it was whatever lectionary reading or whatever, and they said, okay, we're going to do that, and we're going to do this. The question is, if you just hold on to these traditions for the sake of holding on to them, and you wake up one day and you look out and you realize, like, this just doesn't work anymore. I would say the 1 year. Like, again, so this is like an in-house LCMS thing, but there's this thing called the 1 year lectionary.
Right. Where
instead of doing a 3-year cycle ABC, like a lot of us do, you and I and other people, what you do is you do this historic 1 year is what it's called. And so what that is every Sunday, so every 52 cycles, you repeat. So in other words, you're going to get the same one year to year. This Sunday is going to be the same as last Sunday's last year. So there's very little differentiation. Now the argument for it is that you get deep, you get multifaceted, you can go many layers into it, and that there's some of the best readings in the Bible. Fair enough. The, of course, counterpoint, and I think this is the point that I've yet to see argued against, well, is that emerged in a day and a time when people, I guess, either were going to Mass every day or maybe had some better grasp of the Bible. Maybe, I don't know. I'm assuming that. Whereas now, like, if I just give them the 52, like, are they reading their Bible Monday through Friday? I don't know, but I'd rather give them more options with 3 years than 1 year. I don't know. Have you thought about this at all?
I've thought about it some. And see, it's interesting that you would say that. I mean, I do think that there was the expectation that people would do more. Mm-hmm. I think that's an important part of the picture. I think the other thing, too, was that it was a time when things were limited, where society was poorer. Mm. And, I mean, it's pretty interesting. If you look at the old Lutheran hymnal, TLH, mm-hmm. I mean, so many of those hymns, especially in the front half of it, are tied to weeks in that 52. I mean, the texts line up. I mean, one of my favorite Epiphany hymns, Songs of Thankfulness and Praise. I mean, it's about the 4 lessons in the Epiphany lectionary. There's a verse about, Jesus turning water into wine. There's one about him casting out a demon. I mean, you go and look and say, oh, yeah, they're just singing through the Epiphany lessons in the 1 year series.
Which is an argument they make that it's more liturgically sound. It more is a way to be more holistic in your liturgical approach.
Right.
The hymns, mass, and all that stuff.
Right. But if you take someone, a member of your congregation, who is sensitive, thoughtful, creative, mm-hmm. and you just do the same thing for them every single year with no variation, there's going to be pushback. And there's other unhealthy things that happen too. You read like old English literature, and they're always complaining about the vicar or the whoever it is that's there preaching locally in their country church because they said, he really didn't handle reminiscere very well this year. I mean, we know what we expect, and he really stunk at it this year. And so you wind up with these kind of like inside baseball kind of things. And hey, is that really healthy? I mean, it becomes more about how his performance and not about their performance. And so I think there's just a lot of ways that I know that a 1 year guy would push back, and they would legitimately and say, that happens on both sides. They say, my Protestant pastor needs to use a smoke machine like the guy down the street does, and and find some other way to keep me engaged because I'm so overstimulated.
There's a solipsistic argument that says turtles all the way down. Just do whatever you can to meet their needs and radical kind of we'll welcome them and change whatever you have to do so it looks just like the world, so they want to come to church. Yeah, that's the extreme, of course. Yeah, which one? We're not saying that either, obviously.
But I do think the 1 year lectionary has never held much appeal to me, and part of it was because I grew up with it. And the thing is, the pastor gets bored.
Interesting.
The pastor gets bored doing the same lessons every week. And I mean, the pastor I had growing up that I remember, the first pastor I remember listening to in suburban New York, I mean, he did free texts most of the time because he. I mean, I think he was just bored with doing the same ones
over and over
again.
So just to be clear, you'd have the assigned reading every Sunday.
And he'd get up and he'd read it. He'd read it.
So that wouldn't change. So everyone would know the readings every Sunday or the same year, week to week, month, whatever, year to year. But then what he would do is he would then just import a different text and preach on that.
Yep. You just say, yeah.
So the assigned reading today
the assigned reading is from Matthew, but now we're talking about Luke, and I'm going to talk about how the communists are taking over the schools, in suburban New York, and we got to get these communists out of here. And I mean, and that was, that was just the way it rolled. And
by the way, a lot of dudes still preaching that, bro. But yes.
What's that?
A lot of dudes still preaching that exact same way in our church body.
but I mean, I
Marxists. Yeah.
I remember, he preached kind of long for me as a kid. I mean, he would go 45 minutes, and that was long for a kid.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking what he said was interesting enough most of the time,
Yeah. See, but that's the thing though, man. So let me push against you a little bit, and I made the joke to you earlier before we press record, but I is that I want to bow more and not less to the tradition that I'm a part of, which is to say, I may not like my boss, the LCMS and my district I'm in, and my district president, which by the way I like. My kid is a really cool guy, but I don't think it's my job to be innovative, or to push against, or to turn everything into a dragon to slay, or to turn everything into a mini Martin Luther moment, where it's my job to fight against the system and start some revolution and nail my theses to the wall. I want to just shut up and bow a little bit more. And that doesn't play well in America. It doesn't play well just at all to people. But I kind of want to do that. There's a little bit in me that says that's what I want. There's something in me that yearns for that. And now back to your pastor. This is my connecting point here. Is that dude decided to import the text every week, but you know what he didn't decide to do? Take away the 1 year lectionary.
Oh, yeah.
So he submitted to some authority there. And so I'm not making some argument about dudes that do 3 year, 1 year, or all of our brothers that do whatever they want to do every week and import their own series. I'm not, look, man, I've got no bones to pick. All I'm saying is where's the line where you say, I'm just going to shut up and submit? And where's the line where you say, I need to stick it to the man and I need to rebel?
I don't know. I mean, and I'm not even sure. You were kind about the way you said. You're pushing back on me. I mean, I'm not sure I wouldn't push back a little bit on that and just say, is it really a matter of sticking it to the man? Is it really a matter of rebelling to say I'm not going to do the liturgy, or is it more a matter of feeling a desperation that if I don't do something to reach out, that I've just got this small group, and if I don't do something to reach out beyond the group I've got, there's just not going to be a church left in another few years. And I do think a lot of what we see in our brothers that are doing things outside the lectionary is just this. They've got it in their head that they're going to attract more people if they do that, and that's why to come full circle more. I mean, you find now that you're actually able to attract people by doing the liturgical stuff, and is that really bowing now, or is that just saying, you know what, this is always what the church naturally does when it's feeling confident? It says, look, when you're ready to talk, I'm here. And
because we won't change when it doesn't sell in 20 years. When it's no longer in vogue in 20 years, and when my church empties out, and it's passe now, and we're in the new cycle of whatever's hip and cool, and whatever cool thing is on the scene, we'll still be ringing the bells here. We'll still be doing our liturgy thing. That's the difference for me. Because the funny thing is now you see Zondervan Press and Erdman's and these evangelical guys jumping in on liturgy, jumping in on like the Anglican movement. So now they're publishing the Book of Common Prayer for like the first time, like in the past 20 years, like they're jumping on, because people want a prayer discipline, people want order, right? People want to hear the church say, like Jordan Peterson, make your bed, give me a discipline. And they're starting to do it. This is the difference though. Lutherans, like, I don't think we should jump this way or that way. We just do it, man. We just do it, and we'll always do it, because we're part of the Western Roman tradition. This is what we do.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, man,
I'm not really sure it's a matter of like church authority. I think it's more a matter of like who you are, and and then what you're willing to do. And I do think a sort of a market oriented approach where you say, I want to go out and find out what's going to get people to come in. I mean, I personally think it's a dead end for Lutherans because you really are running the risk of like giving up who you are.
Yeah.
In the process of doing that, and I'm not so sure if you did it for a while or for a season or whatever that it would be bad. But if it's just gone permanently, it's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, didn't you guys always do that? I mean, what you're not doing it anymore. What happened?
Yeah. I just you're right. There's something so fishy about churches, our denomination or any that wants to like market. Reduce it to some kind of a sales pitch or market thing, like what's going to get them in the door,
right?
What's going to keep them, I just think that's so, and younger people read right through that, man. They can see that a mile away. They don't do some kind of fake fugazi you're selling them. They don't want that. I don't think anyway.
Yeah, and for me, to kind of go back to something you talked about earlier, and we were talking about how, that the Enlightenment project is, I think, spent.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's true. Mm-hmm. And we're sitting here in the wreckage, and people are casting about for something, for something to hang on to, something solid.
Yeah, amen.
And I mean, we were talking about the real, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and
the real principle.
The idea of just like we're going to have a bias towards the real, and you said something interesting that I remember in response to that. You said that reading from a prayer book is real.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Why is reading from a prayer book real?
I mean, yeah, at one time there was no papyri and there was no scroll to read from, I guess, right?
No, but no, I'm not.
I'm finding the foil. I'm finding the foil always in my own thinking. So someone could press against that. Well, it feels real because I know it's been done for hundreds, thousands of years. I know my grandfather held a book, and my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. So it connects me to the past. Those same prayers were prayed throughout time and history, and spatially throughout the world. Right? Maybe not exactly the same, but in Latin or whatever, they did it 800 years ago. In Japan, they did it. But my point is it connects you to something beyond yourself. It's also real because, and particularly my generation, they grew up where everything's now online and or on a tablet or whatever. Like, we're sitting in a library full of books, and people are like, you could use this space better. Just put it on a zip drive, and you can pull up the PDFs and print them at any time. No, I think there's something nice and something maybe romantic.
Well, what's more? I mean, studies do show that people retain better. I mean, when they read off of paper, and for whatever reason, I don't guess you. The study just needs to show that it's true. It doesn't need to tell you why.
Yeah.
Why
is it real? I don't know. Explore it with me, man. Why does it feel real? Do you agree that it feels realer to hold a prayer book? I mean, we print our bulletins on actual pages here, right? Because we still have lots of people that are not familiar with the hymn book and our LSB. But when we sing songs, I still print the music, but I still see half the church holding the hymnal in their hands, turning to hymn 643 or whatever. If it feels real, I don't know. It just does. You know what I mean? It feels tangible.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's a good question. I think it has to do with how our minds work. We associate things with other things. I mean, all our memory works through association.
Yeah.
And just the smell of a book. Mm. And the feel of it, the feel of the paper, and especially if you're fortunate enough to have had an upbringing where your parents read to you regularly, whatever, and it's just like it's like there's this memory that goes back that, oh, I'm sitting on Dad's lap, and yeah, I know what's coming, but it's just, you know,
Yeah.
I got tired of reading the same books over and over to my children.
Same.
You know, and every
Still
once in a while I would say the words wrong just because I was bored, and
And they
they get really angry. No,